Oh, my goodness. Lovely. Can I put it down? Well, and for me, it is such an honor to have been introduced by Barbie, someone I admire and a real sister. And thank you very much. Okay. Well, early fall afternoons like this take me back to those early days among Bronx Democrats.
Yay!
Yes, the Bronx. Before AOC, there was a Bronx. Yes, and she's one of us. I'm very proud of her, by the way. Anyway, I want to take you back to a different kind of Democratic Party, without which my family and close friends with us today, and doubtless many others here, would probably not be with you in this delightful Southern California setting. We'll start on Bainbridge Road in the North Bronx. Anyone ever been there? Yeah, good. Okay. The light from the summer sun was just beginning to dim that Thursday evening in the late 1930s as my father and I walked down the busy thoroughfare, inhaling fumes from the passing buses. I was 7 or 8, and my dad was taking me for the first time to see how Johnny Murray, district leader of the local Democratic Club, made himself and club members available to anyone in the community. The traditional Thursday night open house was taking place in Democratic clubhouses throughout Manhattan and the Bronx, maybe even in Queens and Brooklyn, as well as this one on the second floor of a storefront building where my dad and I made our way up the flight of dusty stairs. I was introduced to Johnny Murray, the local district boss himself, who greeted me warmly and expressed pleasure that my father was breaking me in to this aspect of club service. By the end of the evening, 5 people had come to him for help. The first was a young man facing eviction. He needed help with back rent because he had been unemployed. His new job was just starting and he wouldn't be getting a paycheck for more than 3 weeks. Give this gentleman what he needs for the back rent, Murray told the woman seated at a nearby table with a yellow legal pad. Then he turned to the second petitioner, a mother in her 20s with a baby about 6 years old and a toddler. Recently widowed, she had visited the regional Social Security office and was assigned a caseworker who had given her an application for the Aid to Dependent Children. Would someone please help her fill it out? Johnny turned to my father, who led her to another table against the wall, made sure that the toddler had a toy from the nearby bin to play with, and began reviewing the questions with her. Next, Murray summoned a man who looked to be in his early 50s, who had been seated nearby watching. He was recruited to contact Bronx Legal Aid on behalf of the petitioner, and so the honor went as each told his or her story and received aid in some form. We left the clubhouse at 8 o'clock because I had to go to school the next day. But I had learned that the local Democratic Club did more than assure that voters would turn out on election day, as I had seen my dad do before every election and sometimes went with him. In the absence of legislative remedies that we take for granted today, they performed the social service function for the working and lower middle class residents, most of them children of immigrants, settling in the newer section of the Bronx near the city line with neighboring Westchester County. Loyalty and service to the Democratic Party was pro forma for many working and middle-class Jews, Italians, and Irish folk during the Depression. hoping for an appointment to a city or state position when one would become available under the patronage system. My dad, who was a struggling lawyer from an immigrant family, had put himself through college and law school. He joined the local club just before the Depression. His loyalty and dependability finally won him an appointment 20 years later to a legal advisor position in the appellate division of the New York State Supreme Court. The judge he served was Albert Cohen, the father of... Wait, I have to take it. Let me get, I'll put it back. John is wonderful. He's my big brother. Anyway, Judge Cohen was the father of, guess who? Roy Cohen. Right, of McCarthy hearings notoriety, and he for whom Trump still yearns. When Judge Cohen retired, as did my dad, a Republican official who had been active in Tom Dewey's campaigns for New York governor was appointed judge in his place. He called my father, who had been retired, and invited him to come out of retirement to serve with him. My father was puzzled. You know, the Republicans had a patronage system too, and they expected to have another Republican appointed to the position my father had held. Needless to say, the judge called my father, and when he was called to answer to the Republican peers for his disloyalty, he said, "I don't want a goddamn hack. I want Bob Malice." And my father did just that. He came out of retirement to serve him. So in the end, his quality of legal service proved even stronger than the patronage system that had given him the opportunity to demonstrate it in the first place. As I grew up, my dad and I discussed current events and politics, sometimes in thunderous disagreement, which often drove my mother to flee the dinner table in tears. Sound familiar, some of you? Yeah. I often think of this as I enjoy animated phone discussions on affairs of the day with my grandson in Portland, who couldn't be with us today. I grew to associate the name Franklin Roosevelt and a Democratic Congress with all good things for families like ours. Sent to bed before the evening broadcasts of FDR's fireside chats, all I had to do was open the bedroom window to hear them bouncing off the walls of the 6-story apartment building coming from my neighbor's radios. A political science and journalism major years later at Syracuse, I moved into political action outside the party banner. I was active in SDA for its mobilization of campus support for First Amendment issues, such as protest against the anti-communist fervor and support for equal rights. I spent much of my summer vacation of 1950 at NAACP at the national headquarters in Manhattan. As a volunteer, I was writing speeches for the director of branches, Gloucester Current. A decade later, Gloucester would be grieving the assassination in 1963 of his field secretary for Mississippi, Medgar Evers, who was active and visible in his work for voting rights. My husband and I would be recruited soon after to help Gloucester resettle Merrily Evers, Medgar's widow, and their children in Claremont, where we had just moved. Back to the years after college, newlywed and living in New York's Upper West Side, I was about to give my father grief. I reconnected with 2 Syracuse classmates in a successful attempt to wrest control of a local Democratic club from the Tammany machine. Recruiting allied local residents, we joined the club and eventually surprised the sleepy Tammany members by outnumbering them at the next club election. This wrested control of the first Democratic club in Manhattan from Tammany machine. One by one, other clubs in the city followed suit with democratically run and affiliated Democratic clubs, and our candidate, Ted Weiss, became male district leader of the club and later was elected to the House of Representatives. In the summer of 1960, as Adlai Stevenson and John Kennedy mobilized their troops for the Democratic Convention, my husband secured a position in California, and with our 8-month-old first child, we left New York for Antelope Valley, and she's here today. On arrival, we discovered toasty August days of 105 degrees and no antelopes. However, my despondency was quickly dispelled when we joined a busload of members from the friendly Antelope Valley Democratic Club, heading to the Shrine Auditorium, where a young John Kennedy worked his magic on us. The dynamic young candidate even touched my outstretched hand as he passed me, seated on the aisle. I served on the board during the 3 years that we lived in Lancaster. We next moved to Claremont, where I soon became vice president of the local club, and I wrote a master's thesis on the public relations program that I ran for the 49th California State Assembly District campaign of Bob Christman. We hosted Ted Kennedy shortly before his brother's assassination. During this period, our family, with our 3 children, participated in activities contesting the war in Vietnam, including rolling down Olympic Boulevard embankments, fleeing SWAT teams from the Century Plaza Hotel in 1968. Is there anyone here who was with us? Thank you. Yes. Yeah, and 2 of those children are here today. Yeah. We also became fierce advocates of ACLU. With hindsight, it is all that more interesting that our anti-war coalition in Claremont included many Republicans who were also fierce advocates of the First Amendment and members of ACLU. It was a very different Republican Party. They stood with us before the City Council when the American Legion tried to keep our peace float from participating in the 4th of July parade. We marched together on July 4th, aware that there were men on nearby cars taking photographs of us for the then not-so-friendly FBI. So there are photographs of us in government files, if you ever want our picture. A Santa Monica resident since 1978, with 7 years away in the 90s to head programs for the state of New Mexico. I've been on the executive board of the Santa Monica Democratic Club now for, I believe, 10 years. The most recent high was one that I shared with my colleagues in surfing the blue wave that you've heard wonderful things about today, and all of us here have, I'm sure, participated in. With the remarkable outcome of 2018, and now continuing the regional-wide unity and action to make it a tsunami in 2020. Yes, I am deeply honored at receiving this award from my colleagues, many of whom I believe, whoops, I lost my place. Yes, thank you. Many of my colleagues, I believe, are more worthy of this award than I am. I can still see the weary but happy volunteers getting off the bus from Orange County outside our West Side headquarters after going door to door since early morning hours, which Dami told you about. There are a lot of heroes among us today. All of us here who work that hard are heroes. Life is never boring if you participate in the exhilarating drama of self-governance. This drives my participation on the Landmarks Commission, in neighborhood associations and the Neighborhood Council, and sharing my views at the Council, Planning Commission, and other public events and meetings. A textbook I once taught from held that democracy is the interplay of rights in conflict. The rule of law makes it possible for these conflicts to be sorted out peacefully, with law and outcome harmonious with our foundational documents and providing protections for those not in agreement. I'd like to introduce members of my family today who descend from this legacy. And if you'd like to stand up, please do. You don't have to. Daughter Lisa and son-in-law David, here from Portland, but formerly from Santa Monica and from El Segundo. Right. Son Jimmy and partner Hardy, and my grandchildren, Tess and Otis. Yes. They are local residents, so we're lucky they are here with us. And my partner, Dennis. Fortunately, we share the same political values, and it's very harmonious most of the time. Now, again, I help me, Big Daddy. Here it is. Okay, Lisa was chair of volunteers in 2008 for the Obama campaign in Conejo Valley. Jimmy has been sharing his good insights on political and current affairs with all of us since childhood, and the generational perspectives of Tess and Otis, along with Everett in Portland, keep me honest. Daughter Victoria could not be here, but she was among the 20,000 this week in Washington Square with Elizabeth Warren. Yes. So I will close now with these words from Native American writer Linda Hogan. Walking, I am listening to a deeper way. Suddenly, all my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say. Watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands. Thank you.